Steve Jobs once said that Jung's writings helped him understand creativity on a deeper level. Sting, the musician, admitted that Jung's visions influenced his songs. Even Hollywood directors like George Lucas have confessed that archetypes inspired by Jung shaped the very core of Star Wars. These names matter because they remind us that the strange and secret pages of Jung's Red Book didn't just remain in a dusty archive, they echoed into the art, music and psychology that shaped the 20th century. But here is the shocking truth. For more than 80 years the book was hidden, locked away, considered too dangerous, too disturbing for the world to see. Why would one of the greatest minds of psychology, the man sometimes called the father of the modern unconscious, deliberately bury his own masterpiece? To answer this, we need to step into the fragile years when Carl Gustav Jung, once Freud's closest ally, felt his mind breaking apart. Between 1913 and 1930, Jung experienced what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. Imagine this. He was 38 years old, respected, married with children, and at the peak of his career after breaking with Freud. Yet at night, visions haunted him. He wrote that he saw Europe drowned in blood, rivers turning red long before the First World War began. And when the war did erupt in 1914, Jung felt both terrified and validated. He asked himself, were these hallucinations a sign of psychosis or a prophetic connection to the deeper layers of the collective unconscious? Modern readers may not realize how risky this was. At that time, the line between genius and madness was paper thin. Psychologists like Eugen Bleuler spoke openly about schizophrenia as a life sentence. For Jung, admitting his visions publicly might have cost him everything: his career, his reputation, even his family. That's why the Red Book was not a casual diary. It was a massive, crimson, leather-bound manuscript, hand-painted with mandalas, mythological figures, and dreamlike landscapes. Jung filled more than 200 pages with calligraphic script, resembling a medieval illuminated manuscript. He wasn't writing for the public. He was documenting his inner descent like a secret gospel. He once said, "The years when I pursued the inner images were the most important time of my life." Yet he also admitted that people would call him insane if they ever saw what he wrote. The tension is there. He felt this was his true work, the root of everything he would later build: archetypes, synchronicity, shadow, anima, and individuation. But he also feared it would destroy him if it ever became public. Think about what that means for us today. How often do we hide our most creative, most vulnerable thoughts out of fear of being judged? Studies show that nearly 72% of people admit they silence their most original ideas at work because they fear ridicule or failure. Jung's choice to lock away the Red Book mirrors this universal dilemma. Do we dare reveal our inner world, or do we protect ourselves by keeping it hidden? Jung's decision teaches us two lessons at once. On one hand, there is wisdom in protecting fragile truths until they are ready. On the other, the danger is that by hiding them, we cut ourselves off from the very medicine we need. For Jung, the medicine was dangerous visions of gods, serpents, and flames. For us, it may be our unspoken desires, our unhealed wounds, our forgotten dreams. The secrecy around the Red Book deepens when you realize it wasn't published until 2009, decades after Jung's death. His family, his heirs, and the Jung Foundation debated fiercely. Some argued it was too personal, almost sacred, never intended for the public. Others believed it was the missing key to understanding Jung's theories. When it was finally released, it became an instant sensation. Within the first year, more than 100,000 copies were sold worldwide despite its high price and massive weight. It is literally the size of an altar book. Scholars like Sonu Shamdasani, who spent years editing it, called it the Rosetta Stone of the Jungian revolution. Suddenly, the hidden heart of Jung's psychology was exposed, and readers discovered a Jung they had never known, a man vulnerable, visionary, at times broken, at times illuminated. So why did he lock it away? Because the book was not meant to convince others. It was a record of his dialogue with the soul. He described conversations with Philemon, a wise inner figure who appeared in his visions, guiding him like a spiritual teacher. He painted serpents and angels, wrote dialogues with gods of chaos, confronted his shadow as if facing demons in a dream. These were not metaphors for Jung, they were lived experiences. And yet, he feared they would be misunderstood. He feared that if the world read them without context, it would dismiss him as mad. In this tension, we find the same question every seeker faces. How much of our inner life can we share without being torn apart by misunderstanding? The Red Book shows us that true transformation often begins in secrecy, in solitude, in the raw chaos of our own unconscious. And the fact that Jung locked it away does not weaken its value. On the contrary, it adds weight to its message. Sometimes what we fear most to reveal is what contains our deepest truth. Jung himself later admitted that everything he ever wrote, psychological types, symbols of transformation, even man and his symbols, came from the seed planted in those red pages. If you've ever wondered why your darkest moments might carry hidden meaning, Jung's hidden manuscript is proof that descent into confusion can give birth to a lifetime of wisdom. In 1913, Europe stood on the edge of catastrophe. But before the cannons of the First World War thundered, Carl Jung was already living through his own private apocalypse. He later admitted that he feared he was losing his mind. Imagine being a respected psychiatrist, a man who had lectured at universities, collaborated with Freud, published groundbreaking studies, and suddenly you start seeing visions of oceans of blood flooding the continent. He didn't just dream them once. He saw them again and again, detailed, violent, unstoppable, and when the war broke out exactly as he had foreseen, Jung realized he had stepped into something larger than personal imagination. He called it the collective unconscious, and his journey into it would become the foundation for everything he later gave to the world. But back then, it felt like an abyss. What made this descent so dangerous was its intensity. Jung recorded that he would sit quietly, close his eyes, and allow images to rise up. At first, they came as fragments, like dreams slipping into daylight. Then entire dramas unfolded. He saw a giant serpent coiling around the roots of the world tree. He encountered a wise old man with the wings of a kingfisher who called himself Philemon. He confronted terrifying godlike figures, monstrous and divine at once. These weren't metaphors for Jung, they were living presences. He wrote about them with the seriousness of someone chronicling history. Yet he knew that to his peers, this would look like psychosis. He confessed, "I was menaced by a psychosis, and it was only with the greatest effort that I could maintain my grip on reality." The line between madness and revelation was razor thin. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, have you ever experienced a dream so vivid, so strange, that you questioned whether it was only your mind or something beyond? Jung dared to go further than most of us ever would. He treated those images as messages. Modern research shows that during dream states, our brains activate networks similar to those triggered by psychedelic substances. In fact, studies from Johns Hopkins in 2019 revealed that under the influence of psychedelics, participants reported encounters with archetypal beings strikingly similar to those Jung described: guides, serpents, voices of wisdom. Jung didn't take drugs. He went in raw voluntarily. He let his imagination open the gates, and he walked straight into them. This descent lasted years. Every evening after his daily responsibilities, Jung would dive back in, writing down what he saw in the small black notebooks that later became the draft for the Red Book. He didn't censor himself. He recorded battles with demons, conversations with his soul, journeys through deserts and underworlds. He called this practice active imagination, a technique that psychologists today still use with patients to explore the unconscious. But for Jung, it was more than therapy. It was survival. He wrote, "I had to let myself be carried along by the current without knowing where it would lead. For 7 years he lived with the risk of drowning in visions that had no guarantee of meaning, and yet meaning emerged. One of the most powerful discoveries was the figure of Philemon, who became Jung's inner guide. Jung said Philemon represented superior insight, a wisdom not his own. He painted him with blue wings and a white beard, like a mythic prophet. Philemon taught him that thoughts were not always his thoughts, that the psyche had autonomous layers, that the unconscious was not just a storehouse of repressed memories, but a living reality. This is where the concept of archetypes was born, not from abstract theory, but from lived encounters. Think of how revolutionary this was. At a time when psychiatry reduced everything to pathology, Jung was saying, what looks like madness may be the doorway to a deeper order. Of course, this raises uncomfortable questions. How do you know if a vision is madness or revelation? How do you know if what rises inside you is a symptom or a truth? Jung wrestled with this daily. He kept practicing medicine, he kept teaching, he kept functioning, while inside he was walking with gods and monsters. The proof that he wasn't consumed by psychosis lies in what came after. Instead of collapsing, he built an entire system of psychology from these experiences: shadow, anima and animus, individuation, synchronicity. All of them germinated in the abyss. He later admitted, everything later was derived from the experiences I had during that time. For us, Jung's descent offers a mirror. Many of us fear our inner darkness. We distract ourselves, we numb the voices, we run from dreams that unsettle us. But Jung shows another path. Descent is not destruction. It can be initiation. When we allow ourselves to face the inner abyss, we may find that the monsters carry messages, that the chaos hides patterns, that the darkness contains seeds of transformation. Neuroscience today supports this. Confronting inner fears activates neural rewiring, fostering resilience and creativity. Jung lived it a century ago, without the language of brain scans, but his testimony still resonates. The soul is a living thing and the psyche is a reality. The Red Book is not the story of a psychologist analyzing patients. It is the story of a man risking himself to find the roots of meaning. His descent into the unconscious was terrifying, but it is precisely that journey that allowed him to return with maps for the rest of us. And that is why it matters. Because when life pushes us to the edge, when everything feels like chaos, we too are invited into the abyss. The difference is whether we turn away, or like Jung, dare to walk in and discover what waits beneath. In 1914, as war tore Europe apart, Jung turned further inward. What he discovered was not silence but voices. Voices that spoke, questioned, challenged, even mocked him. He called them figures of the unconscious, and instead of dismissing them as hallucinations, he did something radically different. He engaged them in dialogue. Imagine this for a moment. You are alone in your study, pen in hand, and a presence rises within you. A voice that is not your own, speaking with authority, with tone, with wisdom or rage. Most people would suppress it, medicate it, or flee from it. Jung leaned closer. He asked questions. He wrote down the answers. And from this dangerous experiment, the Red Book took shape. The first and most intimate of these encounters was with what Jung called his soul. In the opening pages of the Red Book, he writes, my soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you, are you there? It is raw, almost desperate, like a man calling across a canyon, and the soul answers, not with comfort, but with sharp rebukes. She tells him he has been too proud, too rational, too intoxicated with knowledge. She demands he bow down, abandon certainty, and accept the chaos of the depths. For Jung, this was not poetry. He experienced it as a real confrontation, and he obeyed. He allowed himself to be humbled, to be broken open, to listen. That was the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating what we resist. This practice of dialogue is not unique to Jung. Socrates claimed he had a daimonion, an inner voice that warned him against errors. Teresa of Avila spoke of interior conversations with Christ. Modern psychologists call it internal family systems, when we identify and speak with parts of ourselves. What Jung did was bring this into a systematic exploration. By treating inner figures as autonomous beings, he unlocked archetypal truths. For instance, when his soul chastised him, she wasn't only reflecting his personal guilt. She embodied the universal principle that reason alone cannot guide a human being. One must also descend into mystery, into the irrational, to find balance. This is something we all feel. How many times have you followed reason yet felt empty, or suppressed emotion only to be undone by it later? Jung's dialogues remind us that wholeness comes from acknowledging all voices, not just the ones we approve of. Another striking figure he encountered was Elijah, the Old Testament prophet, and with him, Salome, the temptress who asked for the head of John the Baptist. These two appeared together in his visions, representing wisdom and seduction, spirituality and instinct. They unsettled him. Why would a biblical prophet walk hand in hand with a symbol of dangerous desire? Jung wrestled with this contradiction. Through dialogue, he came to see that opposites must be united. Spirit cannot reject matter, wisdom cannot reject passion. To seek wholeness, one must reconcile, not split apart. This insight later became a cornerstone of Jung's psychology, the union of opposites, the conjunctio. For us, it translates into the recognition that the parts of ourselves we most want to exile, the desire, the anger, the vulnerability, are often precisely what we must integrate if we want to grow. And then there was Philemon. Unlike the soul who challenged him, Philemon guided him. Jung described him as a wise old man with kingfisher wings, a figure who seemed to embody timeless knowledge. Philemon taught me about the objective nature of the psyche, Jung later wrote. In other words, he realized that the unconscious is not just a dumping ground of repressed material, but a world with its own laws, its own wisdom. Philemon was like a guru, a spiritual master, but one born from within. He told Jung that his thoughts were not his own possessions. They were currents in a larger sea. For anyone listening now, this is a revelation, that the ideas and inspirations we receive may not be simply ours, but part of a collective stream of meaning. Artists know this. Writers, musicians, inventors, all testify that ideas arrive sometimes suddenly as if given. Jung's dialogues made that process explicit. There is a tension here. Was Jung talking to himself or to independent realities? Even today, scholars debate this. Neuroscientists might say these were projections of his unconscious. Mystics might argue they were encounters with actual spiritual beings. Jung himself never resolved the question. He embraced the paradox. Whether these figures are real or not, he said, they are real enough, and that is the key. If an inner voice speaks with clarity and brings transformation, its ontological status matters less than its effect. What counts is whether it leads us toward integration or fragmentation. And Jung found that his dialogues, though terrifying at times, led to deeper integration. The Red Book is full of these conversations, written in calligraphic red ink, sometimes poetic, sometimes cryptic. He speaks with his soul about humility. He argues with Salome about desire. He listens to Philemon explain symbols. He even confronts demonic figures that embody his shadow. It reads like a script between human and divine, sane and insane, light and dark. And by reading it, we too are drawn into dialogue. We may start hearing our own hidden voices, the ones we ignore in the rush of daily life. That is perhaps why the book feels so alive. It doesn't just tell us what Jung experienced. It invites us to recognize our own inner figures, to stop silencing them, and to ask what they want from us. Think about this. Studies show that 80% of people report an inner critic, a voice that attacks or doubts them. Yet few of us ever respond to it, engage it, or learn from it. Jung's example suggests a radical shift. Instead of repressing that voice, we might ask it why it's there, what it protects, what truth it carries. The same goes for the inner child, the wounded self, the dream figures that visit us at night. They are not random. They are messages, and if we dare to dialogue as Jung did, we may discover wisdom where we expected only chaos. This is what makes the Red Book so powerful. It is not just Jung's autobiography of madness, it is a manual for listening to the soul. By showing us his dialogues, he legitimizes ours. He says, do not be afraid if voices arise within you. Do not be quick to judge them as sickness. Engage them, question them, learn from them. Because in those dialogues, the path to wholeness begins. By the time Jung's dialogues with the soul and Philemon deepened, his inner world erupted into a theater of images that were both terrifying and astonishingly beautiful. These weren't fleeting dreams, they were overwhelming visions, detailed scenes of creation and destruction, chaos and rebirth. He painted them in the Red Book with extraordinary care. Mandalas glowing with fire, serpents coiling through cosmic landscapes, gods rising and falling like storms. To modern eyes, these pages resemble medieval illuminated manuscripts or psychedelic art. But for Jung, they were not art. They were revelations, the raw material of archetypes, universal patterns that shape every human psyche. And he insisted they were not merely personal fantasies, but messages from the deep collective unconscious. Consider this. Nearly every culture has creation myths, chaos before order, the birth of light from darkness. In his visions, Jung saw a similar cycle. He witnessed a cosmic egg cracking open, out of which poured symbols of life and death intertwined. He described fire-consuming worlds, only to give way to green shoots of renewal. These weren't abstract ideas, they were living dramas he experienced, night after night. He wrote, "The spirit of the depths took my understanding and all my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable." That phrase is telling. Jung was admitting that reason, logic, the tools of science, had to bow before something older, something mythic. And what he discovered in those visions became the very DNA of archetypal psychology. Archetypes are not inventions. They are recurring images across history. Mother, hero, trickster, shadow, wise old man, divine child. Jung's visions were crowded with them. Salome reappeared as the anima, the inner feminine that draws the masculine psyche into deeper feeling. Elijah carried the archetype of the prophet, the spiritual authority. Philemon became the wise old man, the inner sage. The serpent, coiling endlessly, carried the archetype of transformation and renewal. These figures did not simply visit Jung, they enacted dramas that revealed truths. For instance, when Salome confessed her love for him, Jung recoiled. How could a symbol of seduction declare such intimacy? But beneath the shock was an archetypal truth. Desire, even dangerous desire, is part of the path to wholeness. Reject it entirely, and you fragment yourself. Integrate it wisely, and it becomes fuel for transformation. What is striking is how consistent these visions are with universal human experience. Studies in comparative mythology by scholars like Joseph Campbell later showed that the same archetypes repeat in myths from Greece, India, Africa, and the Americas. Jung didn't know Campbell at the time, but his own visions confirmed it. The unconscious speaks in universal images, not private codes. This explains why millions feel resonance when they watch a movie like Star Wars or read The Lord of the Rings. The hero's journey, the confrontation with the shadow, the guidance of a mentor, these are not just stories, they are archetypal dramas that mirror our inner lives. Jung was among the first to recognize this, not in libraries, but in the furnace of his own unconscious. And yet the chaos was always close. Jung admitted that some visions nearly broke him. He saw the death of gods, blood covering cities, serpents devouring the sun. These apocalyptic images left him shaken. He wrote that he felt as if he had been overcome by a torrent. But within the destruction came revelation. In one vision he saw the god Izdubar, a figure of immense power, collapse, wounded and helpless. At first Jung felt despair, but then he realized, the old gods die so that new forms can be born. This mirrored the cultural moment. Europe's old certainties were collapsing in the trenches of World War I. Jung's inner apocalypse reflected the outer one. The archetypes were not just personal, they were collective, erupting through him as a representative of the times. For us, the lesson is clear. When chaos overwhelms us, whether personal crisis, cultural collapse, or inner breakdown, it may also be the moment when deeper patterns reveal themselves. Neuroscience today confirms that the brain under stress often generates symbolic dreams, vivid images that help us process trauma. Jung's visions anticipated this. The psyche doesn't collapse into chaos randomly, it stages symbolic dramas to guide us through. That means our nightmares, our strange dreams, our sudden images of fire or water or serpents may not be meaningless. They may be archetypal language pushing us to grow. Jung himself came to see his visions not as pathology but as creation. He wrote and painted for hours, sometimes obsessively, sometimes with terror. The mandalas he drew, circles filled with intricate patterns, he realized were images of psychic wholeness. Years later, he said these mandalas appeared spontaneously when his psyche was in turmoil, as if the unconscious itself was trying to heal by giving him symbols of order. Think about how astonishing that is. When the conscious mind breaks down, the unconscious creates order through images. It is as if the soul knows how to guide itself toward balance, if only we are willing to listen. The Red Book is filled with these visions of chaos and creation. They are wild, surreal, overwhelming, but they are also deeply structured. They reveal the patterns we all live by, even if we don't realize it. Jung locked the book away because he feared people would mistake it for madness. But today, we can see it differently. It is a record of the archetypes in action, a personal apocalypse that gave birth to universal psychology. And it leaves us with a question we cannot ignore. When chaos rises in our own lives, will we turn away in fear, or will we recognize the archetypal drama unfolding and allow creation to emerge from destruction? By the middle of his descent, Jung realized that his visions were not only about gods, prophets, and cosmic creation, they were also about something far more intimate, his own darkness. He began confronting what he called the shadow, those parts of himself he had repressed, denied, or judged unworthy. In the Red Book, this battle is raw and violent. He faces figures that embody cruelty, arrogance, lust, rage. At times, they attack him directly. At other times, they tempt him with promises of power. He confessed that this was the most dangerous part of his journey, because it forced him to acknowledge that the evil he saw in the world also lived inside him. Whoever looks into the mirror of the unconscious, he wrote, sees first of all his own shadow. Why does this matter to us? Because every one of us carries a shadow. Modern studies confirm this. When asked anonymously, more than 90% of people admit to thoughts or impulses they would never reveal publicly. Aggression, envy, fantasies of revenge. We hide these impulses, but they don't disappear. They leak out in our relationships, in our politics, in the cruelty of societies. Jung was brutally honest about this. He wrote that if he did not face his shadow, he risked projecting it onto others, turning them into enemies while refusing to see his own darkness. Isn't this what we all do? We condemn in others what we secretly fear in ourselves. The shadow is not just psychological theory. It is the hidden engine of conflict in families, nations, even religions. In his visions, Jung confronted demons that personified his shadow. One appeared as a bloodthirsty warrior who mocked him, demanding that he admit his own capacity for violence. Another came as a figure of arrogance, claiming that Jung's intellect was just another mask for pride. These were not comfortable dialogues. They shook him. He recorded that at times he feared he was sinking into moral ruin. But through the dialogues, he learned something radical. The shadow cannot be destroyed. It must be integrated. To deny it makes it stronger. To acknowledge it robs it of its destructive power. That is why he later said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." This struggle between light and shadow was not just personal for Jung. He saw it mirrored in the catastrophe of World War I. Europe was projecting its collective shadow, its hunger for domination, its hatred, its fear, onto enemy nations, and the result was slaughter on a scale never seen before. Jung's private visions of rivers of blood were fulfilled in the trenches of Verdun and the Somme. The archetypes he met inside himself erupted into the outer world, and he drew a frightening conclusion. Unless individuals confront their own shadows, societies will repeat the cycle of projection and destruction. That insight is still urgent today. Every conflict, from wars to social divisions, is fueled by unacknowledged shadow projected outward. But here's the paradox Jung discovered. The shadow is not only destructive, it is also a source of vitality. Within its darkness lies creativity, passion, strength. Many artists, from Picasso to Dostoevsky, drew power from exploring their own shadows. Jung realized that if he could integrate his, he would not only survive his descent, but emerge with greater wholeness. He compared it to alchemy. The raw, dark material must be purified and transformed into gold. This is what individuation demands, not perfection, but wholeness. To be whole, you must accept that you are both light and shadow, both angel and demon, both capable of compassion and cruelty. The danger lies not in having a shadow, but in pretending you don't. Think of your own life. How often do you silence anger until it explodes? How often do you deny envy, only to feel it corrode relationships? How often do you project your fears onto others, judging them, blaming them, when the truth lies within? Jung's struggle shows that the only way out is through. The Red Book is full of moments where he resists, then relents, admitting his darkness, only to find new energy rising. It is this courage to face what we hate in ourselves that turns the shadow from an enemy into an ally. Neuroscience now confirms what Jung intuited. Suppression of unwanted thoughts makes them stronger. Studies at Harvard showed that when people tried to block a thought, it returned with greater intensity. Jung's approach, dialogue, acknowledgement, integration, is a proven antidote. By bringing the shadow to light, its grip weakens. That is why he later insisted that therapy must confront the shadow. Without it, no real transformation is possible. The Red Book portrays this inner war vividly. Jung describes being torn apart, humiliated, forced to kneel before his own darkness. But he also describes moments of revelation, when the integration of shadow brought a surge of strength. He saw that the battle between light and shadow was not about choosing one side. It was about holding both, letting them coexist without denial. This is the tension that transforms. He called it the coincidentia oppositorum, the union of opposites. And in this he gave psychology a spiritual depth. The idea that wholeness is born not from purity, but from embracing contradiction. So when we read the Red Book, we are not just watching Jung's private war. We are seeing a mirror of our own. His demons are our demons. His struggle to accept both light and darkness is the same struggle each of us faces daily. And the lesson is stark. Deny your shadow, and it will rule you from the dark. Face it, integrate it, and it becomes the ground of your strength. Jung's inner war teaches us that the path to wholeness is not escape from darkness, but the courage to carry it within the light. When Jung emerged from the darkest confrontations of his shadow, he began to notice something extraordinary. The visions that once seemed chaotic started to arrange themselves into patterns, as if his psyche itself was seeking order. He painted mandalas, intricate circles filled with symbols, colors, and balance. At first, he didn't know why these images appeared spontaneously. Later, he realized they were expressions of the self, the deeper center of the psyche that seeks wholeness. What looked like madness was slowly becoming wisdom. This process, which Jung compared to alchemy, was the transformation of raw chaos into gold. Why alchemy? Because medieval alchemists working in secret laboratories weren't just trying to turn lead into gold, they were projecting their own unconscious processes onto matter. Their texts speak of putrefaction, dissolution, union, rebirth. Jung recognized the same stages in his own inner journey. He called the first stage the nigredo, blackness, chaos, despair. That was his descent into visions of blood and death. Then came albedo, the whitening, a purification, when new insights began to emerge. Finally, rubedo, the reddening, the integration of opposites into a living wholeness. The Red Book itself, bound in crimson, became a symbol of this process. Through alchemy, Jung discovered a language for what he was living. The soul refines itself through confrontation with its own darkness. This is not just Jung's private symbolism, it has universal echoes. Neuroscientists studying trauma now describe a similar sequence: breakdown, reorganization, integration. Survivors of deep crisis often report that their identity dissolves before it is reformed on a new foundation. Post-traumatic growth studies show that nearly 70% of people who endure extreme hardship report new levels of meaning, purpose, or spiritual awakening afterward. Jung anticipated this a century earlier. He dared to see his own near madness not as disease but as initiation. He wrote, "I had to accept that what I had experienced was real. My work is not the fruit of a cold mind, but of one that has been broken and healed. The tension between madness and wisdom is central here." Jung walked a thin line. He knew that if he gave himself entirely to the visions, he might lose contact with reality. But if he denied them, he would suffocate spiritually. His solution was discipline. He balanced his inner explorations with outer work, family, teaching, patience. This balance allowed the fire of his visions to transform him instead of consuming him. That's an essential lesson for us. We too experience breakdowns, moments when life makes no sense, when depression, grief, or crisis pulls us under. The danger is either collapse or denial. But Jung's alchemy suggests another path: to hold the tension, to let the chaos speak, while remaining anchored in daily life. That is how madness can become wisdom. The figures of the Red Book played an essential role in this transformation. Philemon, the winged guide, continued to instruct him, teaching him to see thoughts as autonomous currents, not personal property. The soul reminded him again and again to kneel before mystery, to surrender pride. Even the shadow, once terrifying, became a source of vitality. By integrating these voices, Jung realized he was becoming more than an ego. He was becoming a self, a larger identity that included all opposites, all contradictions. That is individuation, the core of his psychology, the process of becoming whole, not by erasing differences, but by weaving them together. We often imagine wisdom as calm, rational, detached, but Jung's wisdom was born from fire. It was forged in madness, and that is why it speaks so powerfully. He showed that the soul does not grow by avoiding conflict, but by enduring it. The alchemists called this solve et coagula, dissolve and unite. Life must dissolve us before it can unite us at a higher level. For Jung, the dissolution was terrifying visions of gods and serpents. For us, it may be heartbreak, loss, failure, depression. The form differs, but the process is the same. Wisdom is not the absence of breakdown. It is the ability to transform breakdown into breakthrough. Look again at the mandalas Jung painted. They radiate symmetry, beauty, order. But they were born in the aftermath of chaos. That's the alchemical miracle. What begins in darkness can become a pattern of light. We see this echoed in countless traditions. In Buddhism, enlightenment is compared to the lotus rising from the mud. In Christianity, resurrection comes only after crucifixion. In mythology, the hero descends into the underworld before returning with treasure. Jung's Red Book places him in that lineage. He was both scientist and mystic, charting how madness itself, when embraced and disciplined, can become the very path of transformation. For us, the challenge is whether we can adopt the same attitude toward our struggles. Can we see depression not just as an enemy, but as a signal to listen? Can we see anxiety not only as weakness, but as an invitation to reorganize our inner world? Can we face breakdowns not as failures, but as alchemical fires that burn away what no longer serves us? Jung's journey suggests we can, and when we do, what once looked like madness may reveal itself as wisdom. Dangerous, costly, but also luminous. When the Red Book was finally published in 2009, nearly half a century after Jung's death, the world saw not just a private journal, but the secret root of an entire psychological revolution. For decades, Jung had been studied through works like Psychological Types, Symbols of Transformation, and Man and His Symbols. But the Red Book revealed what lay beneath them all. A record of visions so personal, so vulnerable, that he had locked them away in fear. And yet, when opened, they shone with illumination. What once looked like madness became the foundation of wisdom that would influence psychology, art, religion, even popular culture. The legacy of this forbidden manuscript is not just historical. It is alive, shaping how we understand the human soul today. Think about this. The Red Book is over 400 pages, written in ornate calligraphy, filled with more than 60 paintings that look like sacred icons. Jung never intended it for casual readers. He told his family that publishing it would expose him to ridicule. But when it was released, something unexpected happened. Far from dismissing it, readers across the world embraced it. Within its first year, the initial print run of 5,000 copies, priced at nearly $200 each, sold out immediately. Universities built courses around it. Psychologists and spiritual seekers alike treated it as a missing gospel of the modern age. Why? Because it answered a hunger. It showed that psychology was not only about treating symptoms, it was about facing mystery, darkness, and transformation at the deepest level. The illumination of the Red Book is that it bridges science and spirituality. Jung, trained as a psychiatrist, did not abandon reason. He analyzed, classified, compared myths, studied dreams. But through the Red Book, we see that his theories were not just intellectual exercises. They were born of lived experience, wrestled from visions, tested in the fire of the unconscious. Archetypes, the collective unconscious, individuation, these ideas didn't come from statistics or experiments. They came from Jung daring to dialogue with his soul, to paint his visions, to endure years of inner descent. That is why his psychology continues to resonate today. It speaks not only to the mind, but to the spirit. The legacy is also cultural. Without Jung's archetypes, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey might never have become a global framework. Without Jung's shadow, modern therapy would lack one of its most powerful tools. Without his anima and animus, our understanding of gender, creativity, and relationships would be poorer. Even filmmakers like George Lucas, musicians like David Bowie, and novelists like Hermann Hesse drew inspiration from Jung's inner explorations. In a sense, the Red Book is not only Jung's personal illumination, it is a hidden source of much of modern culture. Its echoes ripple through the stories, music, and ideas that shape how we imagine ourselves. But its most important legacy is personal. Reading the Red Book is unsettling because it forces us to ask, what is waiting in our own unconscious? Jung teaches us that illumination is not given cheaply. It is earned through descent. He shows us that our inner demons, our suppressed desires, our terrifying dreams, are not enemies to be eliminated, but teachers to be heard. Illumination comes not by denying darkness, but by integrating it. That is why he could write, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious." This is a sentence that cuts through centuries of spiritual illusions. It tells us that the path is not escape, but integration, not flight into transcendence, but rooting into the depths of our own being. The Red Book leaves us with a paradox. Jung hid it because he feared it would make him look insane. Yet today it is the very text that convinces us of his genius, his vulnerability, his willingness to record conversations with the soul, his honesty about his fear. All of this makes him more trustworthy, not less. It shows us that wisdom does not come from perfection. It comes from brokenness, from the courage to walk into the unknown and return with insight. That is illumination. Not a light that erases darkness, but a light born from darkness itself. For us, the invitation is clear. The Red Book is not meant to be a museum piece, admired from a distance. It is a challenge. Can we too listen to our inner voices? Can we too face our shadows without denial? Can we too allow chaos to transform into order, pain into meaning, solitude into dialogue with the soul? If Jung's journey teaches anything, it is that the path of illumination is not reserved for geniuses or prophets. It is open to anyone willing to risk honesty with themselves. The final legacy of the Red Book is hope. Jung descended into visions that could have destroyed him. Instead, they became the source of a lifetime of wisdom. And if he could emerge from the abyss with treasures for humanity, then so can we. Every breakdown can hold the seed of breakthrough. Every darkness can hide a light waiting to be revealed. The Red Book is proof that the human soul, no matter how deep it falls, is capable of illumination.